Now, just right off the bat, what do you find interesting about the fact that Peter gets asked this question 3 times?
I'm thinking how he denied Christ 3 times when he was crucified.
Sure, totally. I think of that too. And what does that parallel make you think about?
The chance to repair his own shame about what he did.
Yeah, totally. I think that exact same thought. I've been thinking about, why does he ask him 3 times the exact same question? And to me, it has this total symbolism of like healing these 3 rifts, right? That Peter is so well known for betraying Jesus 3 times, denying him 3 times, and that this is like this reintegration. The thing that I find interesting about this passage is that he doesn't call him Peter. The text does. He calls him Simon, son of John. And I went to a Bible study with some pastors who were much wiser than I am, and I asked them about this, and they didn't have a lot to add to it. But then this insight came to me. So check out what happens, right? Jesus is murdered, and all the disciples bounce because they're terrified, because they don't know how to abide. But the women know how to abide in pain and suffering and death and loss and trauma and grief. And the men are like, F this S, I'm out, right? And so then the women find that Jesus is gone. And they go tell the guys, and they do this foot race, and they look in, and he's gone. And they bounce and go home and go back to sleep. And the women stay, and then they encounter the risen Christ. So then finally, Jesus has to go to their house, because they are not able to stay in the hard place. He has to sneak up on them. Right? How many times has God had to sneak up on you because you were running away from God? And God's like, be with you! Right? So that happens, and the first time it happens, there's absolutely no indication in the text that Peter has any interaction with Jesus when this happens. Jesus shows up, tells him some stuff, and then whoosh. And then Thomas is like, man, I wanted to see him. I don't even believe that you saw him. I need him to be here or I won't believe. And so Jesus is like, peace be with you the next week, right? Sneaks up on him again, meets Thomas in his need, and cares for him in his particular need for faith development. Still, no indication that there's any healing of the rift between Jesus and Peter. Now, Peter's hanging out in this community, but you got to imagine that he's like kind of imposter syndrome in this space, right? Like, I denied Jesus. I mean, y'all bounce too, but I actively denied Jesus. I didn't just hide. I pretended I didn't know him. And he's probably getting into arguments about, well, yeah, if you had been there where I was at least around for a minute, and all the women are back like, yeah, sure. Mm-hmm, good for you. All right. He's probably arguing with the men because that's how they do. So then it's now after those 2 sightings, and they're sitting around and don't know what to do. So, of course, what's Peter's idea of what we're going to do? Go fish, because that's what he knows how to do, right? So for me, this whole story centers upon this experience that, like, we have this incredible encounter. We've been following this guy in John's Gospel for 3 years. In the other Gospels, it's just a year, but in John, it's 3 years of following Jesus, 3 years of not fishing, right? 3 years of being a follower of the Messiah. And healing people and casting out demons and doing works of power in the name of God and in the name of Christ, right? 3 years of that. And then he's murdered just like he told you he was going to be. And y'all run away. But then he appears to you twice as alive, which should be doing some work of confirmation that 3 years of your time was real. That ministry and that activity, that call, that stuff was real. And what does he do? He goes fishing. He goes back to the life he had before as if none of that really mattered. And so when Jesus refers to him as Simon, son of John, that was his fishing name. That was his fishing life. That was his profession that he inherited from his dad. But when he was called at the beginning of John's Gospel, in chapter 1, he says, "You, Simon, son of John, you shall be called Peter," which is translated in Hebrew to Cephas, which means rock. Now, some commentators will say Peter's called rock because he's got rocks for brains. And some people will say that he's called Peter because he's the rock on which the church is built. And I say both and. I don't like the binary. I say just mash them all together. Rocks for brains, foundation of the church. And we just do that throughout all the centuries. Rocks for brains, foundation. That's who we are. We're people. He's eminently human. But he goes back to his life. And so Jesus doesn't use his new name. Because I think Jesus is asking him to claim his new name. Are you Simon, son of John? Or are you Peter? Did this mean anything to you? Or does this really mean everything to you? In Greek, there are 4 words for love. Do you all know this? 4 different words for love. So there's eros, philia, storge, I think is how you pronounce it, and agape. So eros is that kind of passionate, romantic, sexual love. Philia is that love among kind of colleagues, that sorority, we're equals kind of love and care. Storge is the love of parents to children. And then agape is actually the Greek word that Jesus uses all the time when he talks about love. And so as I was preparing for this sermon, I was thinking about all these different kinds of love. And the thing that occurred to me is that the first 3 are all kind of like conditional relational types of love, right? Like eros is like, I love you in the sense that like I'm interested and you're interested and we're interested. There's like that connection part, right? And there's some people that I just don't feel that for, right? But there's some people that I do, and so it's a self-sorting kind of deal, right? And there's only so many people that I'm going to be dad to, right? There's all literally one, right? So Sturgia is kind of a limited one in my life. Now, potentially I could adopt some kids, or some of you I know have people in your life that have kind of like become your surrogate kids or grandkids, and there's a way that they become part of your life, and then that love kind of flows through, but it's very contextual and limited, right? And the same way with philia, that sorority, that camaraderie piece, right? It's got a certain amount of like class, race, social, political context, like we're equals, we already recognize each other as on the same plane, and so we can kind of invest in each other, right? And those 3 types of love are important and powerful, and each one of us in our own ways knows how we feel those types of loves and how they're different in our life, right? But the kind of love that Jesus is asking us to is the kind of love that doesn't require a certain context first. I think this is why it's actually so important that we use the Greek here to think about this instead of just translating into English where all these things get mashed up together. Because when we think about the call of Jesus, we think about the 3 years of Peter's life. We think about how he's constantly reminding them to love first. He's constantly reminding them to risk, to step out, to offer kindness and compassion, to literally give away food to people that could go buy it themselves, right? To literally open up your home, to literally lay hands on people that kind of make your stomach turn, right? That he's been training them in agape. His whole ministry has just been training them in, can you love first? And so when he encounters Simon, son of John, on the beach, I think there's a sense that he's trying to ask him, do you get the point? Or are you just hanging out with your buddies? Right? Is this just philia? Do you love me more than these? He's asking them, is this just your buds? Is this just your comfortable life that you're coming back to? Or are you committed to me? Because the love is the agape. Do you love me more than these? If he had asked them, do you love these guys? He might have used the word philia to convict Peter a little bit. This is my fantasy about how Jesus might have played this. And then I love Peter here. He's like, you know that I love you. What a lame answer. How many times has somebody asked you, do you love me? And you're like, you know I love you, baby. Right? It's like a not risk answer. Like, you already know the answer to that question. I'm not going to be vulnerable here. I'm not gonna step out. Like, answer it yourself. Right? Like, how lame is that? Like, how dude is that? It's such a dude thing to do. It's such a dude thing to do. But he does it, and he doesn't learn anything because he does it 3 times. He doesn't just say, I love you. He says, you know I love you. Peter is this kind of rock too, still. Right? But then Jesus responds and says, feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed my sheep. Who are Jesus' sheep? We'll get back to this in a couple of weeks, but it's an important question to ask yourself. Who is Jesus entrusting to Peter? And what does that mean about the work that Peter's being called to do? Is he says, if you really love me, you're not just going to have a feeling about people. You're going to care. You're going to tend. And not just sheep, but lambs, right? The ones that are the most vulnerable, the ones that are the most in need, the ones that are the least capable of producing wool for you to get a living on, you fishermen do, right? Like that, there's that undoing, right? That 3 questions. That undoing and hopefully breaking open some of that fear about not being worthy of being a disciple, right? That fear about not being, the worry about not doing it wrong, right? That we talked about earlier. And that kind of calling out, shaming about all of that, which I assume has been happening in these conversations with these other disciples. But also this are you going to actually love or not? Are you going to actually risk or not? As you go out into the world with all of your fear, are you still going to act? And then there's this cryptic ending, right? When you were younger, you fastened your own belt around your waist and went wherever the hell you want. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone will fasten a belt around you and lead you where you don't want to go. Now, there's a bunch of commentary in there about, Peter gets crucified and he has to be crucified upside down. That's why the upside down cross is not actually a satanic symbol. It's actually a reverent symbol. Peter said, I don't want to be crucified the way Jesus was. That would be disrespectful to Jesus. Hang me upside down. Can you imagine how absolutely horrifying that is? Ugh. But anyway, commentators are like, but this is in the wrong order. The fastening the girdle would have to happen before the arms, blah, blah, blah. This is all technical. It doesn't really matter. The point is that when we only do what we really want to do, right, then we are completely limited by our fear because we don't want to be uncomfortable. Right? If you only did what you really wanted to do, and you didn't have this sense of call, this sense of ministry, this sense of purpose, this sense of being part of God, then your life will probably be pretty small. And it'll feel like it has lots of freedom in it. We've talked about freedom before, and this American pasteurized, kind of minimized, cheap freedom, and then this real freedom to do the real work that God calls. This self-absorbed, individualistic freedom. And I think it's interesting that Jesus makes this comment, and of course John with this traditional fourth wall breaching, he did this in order to make sure he knew how he was going to die. I don't think it's about the crucifixion. I think it's about if you're really going to love the way that I'm calling you to love, not this brotherhood, sorority kind of love, not this romantic, sexual kind of love, not just this love for children. But if you're going to love the way that I've been loving, then it's going to be pretty difficult sometimes. And you're not going to be in charge. And other people are going to lead you where you don't want to go. I think about all the work that men have to do to be able to actually listen to and respect women in society. And we have to go where we don't really want to go because we have to deal with all the internalized patriarchy in our lives and in our society. The same thing with white folks. We need to start following people of color, and they're going to take us places we don't want to go. And we have to decide on some level that we're going to trust and risk. You know, one of the rifts that was happening at annual meeting this year, do you know what it was really about? $52,000 was set aside in the budget of our conference out of $500,000 annual budget. $52,000 is being set aside that's to be spent at the sole discretion of the pastors of color in our conference. And they don't have to tell us what they spend it on. Now, your faces are very diverse right now. You can only see this much. And so I just want to tell you why I think this is significant. And then I'll tell you why I think it was a problem. And then I'll tell you why I'm telling you about it in this sermon. So why I think it's significant. This is a predominantly white-skinned, white experience conference in a predominantly white-skinned, white experience denomination. And historically, we have been beneficiaries of the pattern of white supremacy in our society, and we have inherited land and wealth and resources, and we have systems and structures in place that very much fit into white culture. And so setting aside a tenth of the budget, just to say, we see that there are a few pastors of color who have decided to be in this conference and continue to decide to be in this conference even as they experience subtle and less subtle racism in this conference, in the church. They still continue to show up and serve. And even a couple of years ago, in 2019, we had an annual meeting where the pastors of color got up and told stories about what had happened to them while they were pastoring our churches. And the white folks in the congregation that were there said, well, clearly this is just like hyperbole. You know, they're just telling us a story to help us understand how they feel. But this stuff didn't really happen. And the pastors of color are like, and you want me to do this again? So there was a decision last annual meeting. We're going to set aside money and we're going to let these folks spend it. And we're just going to ask broad brushstrokes. Spend it for COVID relief. Spend it for mission trips and scholarships. Spend it to support activism and organizing in our conference. And that's the level of specificity. I think that this is critical because it's an act of trust. It's an act of saying, just the fact that you're here means that somehow you feel called to go where you don't really want to go. But you're here because there's something bigger calling you to this work. And you're afraid. Ask them, they'll tell you, they're afraid, but they're doing it anyway. Just like Shirley Chisholm running for president. Right? Now, why I assume it was perceived as problematic is, you know how excited we are about accountability these days? How many times a week you hear someone talk about accountability? And accountability is important. And around money, especially in the church, right? Like, we need to be transparent about finances. We need to be accountable to this money, to these gifts that people give, because there's too many garbage pastors and garbage churches and garbage religion that just is bilking people, right? That's selling heaven and stealing people's lives. And so I get it. And there was a bunch of people that were anxious about that and feeling like, well, we're setting a double standard, and this isn't respectful of his gifts that are given. Now, to be perfectly clear, very few churches and individuals actually gave gifts into this pot of money, and y'all are a part of that. You are one of the 4 churches that gave money over the last year to this fund. And only 10 individuals gave personally, so I just want to congratulate y'all for participating and being part of this, and I expect we will continue because it's the way of being of the development here. But anyway. And then, of course, some of the pastors of color share their real feelings. And how do you think that made some of the really good white people feel? Oh, it was so bad. It was so bad. So why am I telling you this story in this sermon? Because to me, this whole thing was about this question. Do we have the capacity, are we building the willingness to trust first? To risk first, even when we're afraid. It's $50,000. Like, that's not really that much money in a conference that's $500,000 annual budget. Like, it's really not that much. Do we not even have the capacity to trust that much? I mean, to me, it signaled how out of relationship we really are. Because, I know these people, these pastors that are making these decisions. I know that they have a heart for God. I know that they're good stewards of money. I know that they would never spend it unethically. And that their relationship, the whole purpose of building this thing, was so that they could do ministry that they see isn't happening. So that they could set some priorities that need to be set. Because they see something. They're not Simon, son of John anymore. They are Peter, the rock on which the church is built. They've had transformation, and we should just trust them for a hot second with almost. I know $50,000 is like a lot in some contexts, but it's nothing in other contexts. And I just thought, man, sometimes I just think we're still all out fishing. Sometimes I think, did we really go through something? Did we really find an empty tomb? Did we really heal and cast out demons in the name of this Jesus? Or were we just waiting to get back to fishing? We are called to love first. We are called to notice our fear, our anxiety, our discomfort. Not to be those things. Sometimes people think that anti-racism work is about being uncomfortable all the time. That's not the point. The point is to be capable of being uncomfortable so that you can do the work. So that you can show up, so that you can continue to love, so that you can receive a real feeling from somebody and not crumple in terror that it means that you're not a good person anymore. You guys, we have a Savior in Jesus Christ, and the bottom line here is that you are loved no matter what. There is nothing that could possibly take away your belovedness, period. You can screw up every single day of your life. You can be a horrible, mean person every day of your life, and it may break every single relationship you have with other people, but it will never cause God to stop loving you. And the second that you really feel that, you will be so convicted by all of the damage you have done in your life that I believe you will move from Simon to Peter, and you will decide. And now maybe those relationships will stay broken because maybe you really hurt some people. And maybe it's they can't find it in themselves to forgive you. And you gotta learn how to be okay with that and decide that at least right now, I'm gonna take all of that as information. I'm gonna take all these feelings as information, and I'm gonna stand on the rock of my knowledge of belovedness, of mercy and justice, of loving people because they're worth loving no matter what. And I'm going to take the next faithful step. As Christian people, we are called to also know our limits, know what we can endure. So that when we try, when we risk, when we trust, when we step out, we know what we can handle and what we can't. We know that we can tolerate somebody yelling at us, or that it's going to trigger trauma and terror in us, and it's not going to be safe for them or us to be in that space. And we know our limits, and we know our boundaries. Right? Knowing yourself is part of being capable of being a Christian in the world. of tending the sheep. If you don't know how to work with sheep, then stop trying to shear them. You know what I mean? They'll kick you. How many of you have ever seen somebody shear a sheep? A professional? Oh my God, they just throw that sheep around. They do it in like 30 seconds. It's terrifying, but they know exactly what they're doing. And they step in with authority and they do it. But that's not even my point today. My point today is that we have to decide that we're going to be people who choose to love first, who choose to risk first. And we have to do that in a thoughtful and a safe way, in a way that honors God and others or people. But we can't let this cage of fear hold us back, because there is a home out there. We're trying to get out of this thing so that we can get into this other way of being, because the world is too terrifying right now for us to stay and manifest and multiply that fear. It needs the love. It needs the generosity, because that little bit, right, from that handyman, that little bit of generosity, that little bit of care, it changes the landscape of our lives. And you can change the landscape of the lives of all the people that you interact with. Even if you just start with that germ, that seed, that little bit of care, it can do amazing things.